everyone. So how many of you remember, I believe it was back in March, when all of a sudden Bird, Lime, and Spin scooters just kind of appeared all over the city? Anyone remember that? Okay, nice. Well, yeah, I'm here. Brian, you don't live here, but okay. That's my coworker. Doesn't matter. So I'm here with Sanjay of Skip and Tom McGuire of the SFMTA. And within the last week, San Francisco actually decided which scooters to offer permits to for which companies to offer permits to for electric scooters. Sanjay, Skip was one of those permits. What does this mean for your company?
We're excited to be, given the opportunity to serve our hometown. So we've been working on electric scooter sharing in San Francisco for the better part of a year now, but we chose to launch in Washington, D.C. across the country because we were able to create a permit process with them. We've always wanted to be able to operate here, but wanted to do it through collaboration with different parts of the city and with the auspices of the SFMTA, so we're really excited to be here.
Nice. And Tom, what do you ultimately envision from this pilot program? So, you gave permits to Skip and Scoot. That could, change over the years, but initially those are the two. So what do you kind of hope to get from this pilot?
That's right. We offer the permits to Scoot and Skip, and we see this, a one-year pilot that we're embarking on, as a learning experience for the city, for us in government, for the permitted private sector companies, and for the city as a whole. I think there was a lot of really vigorous debate about whether scooters worked in San Francisco, whether they were safe, whether they were the right thing to permit in the city. And we want to take the energy and the innovation that the private sector is clearly bringing to this mode of transportation and prove it out in the street, and prove it out in a way that where we have some oversight over the safety and the operation of the scooters.
How was it for you when those three companies just deployed the scooters in San Francisco back in March? Were you just kind of like, whoa, did not see this coming, or what was that like?
So we had heard a little bit about the scooters rolling out in Southern California. So it was not a total whoa moment for us, but it was very sudden, and it was not something that we had any sort of legal frameworks in place for. We love small-scale electric mobility in San Francisco. We are being crushed by traffic in San Francisco, and we have to find ways to get this growing population around without using cars. That said, we were definitely caught back on our heels in March when those three companies launched.
How do you think this kind of compares to the earlier days of ride-hailing?
The uptake of ride-hailing was maybe a little slower. One of the things that happened in the evolution of ride-hailing is that ultimately the state asserted the jurisdiction over Uber and Lyft in San Francisco, so we don't really have much control over the number of Uber and Lyft vehicles that operate in our city, and unfortunately that has proven to be part of the reason we have this traffic problem we have. But I think what's different this time is that we were able to move really quickly to get some meaningful regulations in place, and we're confident that we've got some private sector actors who are going to roll out scooters in a way that really meets the public interest.
So Sanjay, October 15th is when you can officially deploy your scooters in San Francisco. Is that the plan? October 15th, we'll see Skip scooters on the street?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of work to do between now and then, working with SFMTA to provide more materials and show certain plans. The initial proposal that we submitted in early June was kind of a preliminary proposal. Now the work begins to actually make sure we're deploying in the right areas, that we have the right processes in place. There's a fair bit of work to do. So we're still busy now, but our scooters are ready to go, and our team is ready to hit that date.
And in the past week, because I just think generally some concerns with electric scooters are around safety, whether that's, safety of pedestrians on the sidewalk, safety of the people riding the scooters themselves. A couple of days ago, there was an unfortunate accident where someone actually died while riding a scooter from another company. In terms of, how does that kind of affect your thinking when you around safety and Skip scooters and ensuring people are wearing helmets and all of that?
Yeah, it's It's been interesting to see this changing over time. So I started working on light electric vehicles that were meant to operate in the bike lane about 7 years ago with boosted boards. And what we saw was that it's very hard to control individual behavior, right? You have safe drivers and unsafe drivers. You have safe cyclists and unsafe cyclists. And so I think scooter sharing isn't going to be any different. But what we can do is, focus on the safety of the vehicle, focus on education of riders, focus on providing access to things like helmets through either technologies on the scooter or programs that we support on the back end. And then there's also the safety of the people around you, right? So how do you think about the etiquette of you going by someone on the sidewalk at 15 miles an hour, or the way you pass cyclists, or the way you park the vehicle and whether it tips over right afterwards? So there's a bunch of different aspects to it, but I'm generally optimistic that the good actors will outweigh the bad.
And Tom, for you, best case scenario, how do you see electric scooters fitting into the current transportation ecosystem in the city?
Well, there's this problem in transportation that we sometimes call the first mile, last mile problem, and scooters are just perfectly adapted to, positioned rather, to help solve that problem. We're a city that has prioritized moving as many people as possible on mass transit, and we are investing hundreds of millions of dollars in expanding the Muni system and the Caltrain electrification, but not everyone lives within walking distance of really reliable transit in San Francisco. And so things like bike share, things like scooter share can help bridge that gap so that people don't need to get in their car to get to transit or don't need to get in their car to get around. They can be transit users, and they've got something convenient to help them get around, get to and from mass transit. And then, of course, the vast majority of trips that are made in San Francisco are very short distances. Most trips are, whether you're looking at Uber and Lyft trips, or you're looking at the majority of trips that are made by walking, most people aren't going that far outside of their daily commute. And so we definitely see a niche role, a big niche for this kind of small-scale electric mobility.
And do you envision there ever being scooter-specific lanes or anything like that? I know in other cities they've been thinking about how can we make it more clear that an electric scooter is allowed to be here, like maybe along with the bikes, or maybe in their own lane, or how is the SFMTA thinking about that?
Yeah, I think we'll learn more about that during the pilot. We've got this goal in San Francisco called Vision Zero. We want to end all traffic fatalities by 2024. And unfortunately, we lose between 20 and 30 people a year on our streets. So our vision is to make the streets so safe that people on foot, people on bikes, people on shared electric scooters, and other small-scale modes like that are just safe, that they're not being hit and killed by cars. So I think there's some discussions down the road about, are you allowed to use a bike lane? What size street are you allowed to ride on? We'll learn a lot this year about that stuff, but what I want to do is create a street system where everyone's safe, no matter where you ride.
And Sanjay, is that something that you would want with Skip, for there to be scooter-specific lanes? Would that be helpful, or do you think that there's...
Yeah, just lanes that only allow scooters would be great. I think generally you're seeing cities have the sidewalk, the bike lane, and the car lane. And the car lane we're seeing increasingly is just not the place to solve a lot of these problems. It doesn't solve short trips very effectively. It has to accommodate vehicles that are designed for highway speeds, and so you end up with a lot more metal and cost in that vehicle that you may not need for that short 1 mile trip. And then the sidewalk really should be for pedestrians. You shouldn't have a lot of vehicles moving at 15 miles an hour next to someone who's trying to walk at 3 miles an hour, someone in a wheelchair. That should really be kind of a safe space for them. And so I think the bike lane is going to expand to include scooters, bicycles, electric skateboards, other kinds of light mobility. As long as the speeds are low enough and the weight of the vehicle and the form factor is the right one, I think that lane's actually going to get better and improve. And San Francisco is one of the places we're committing to invest in bike lane infrastructure. But I think bike lane infrastructure investment is going to benefit a lot of systems like these, and it's going to get a lot of support from the people who are using them that's potentially much broader than the cyclists who've been advocating for them for years so far.
So, as everyone knows, there are a number of these electric scooter companies. How, Sanjay, for you, how do you envision getting brand loyalty? Because, at least for me, when all the scooters were just out on the streets in San Francisco, it didn't really matter to me if it was a Bird, a Lime, or a Spin. It was just the closest scooter to me. So maybe even after this pilot program, when there are theoretically more companies to compete with, how do you plan to get people to pick Skip over over one of the other ones?
Yeah, so I think it's maybe two phases. The first phase is that there isn't actually, like you said, there isn't a strong sense of I'm going to go pick this scooter or that one, I'm going to pick the one that's closest, right? I'm going to pick the one that's closest that's at least this level of safety or reliability. And so I don't think it's zero sum. I don't think that we win and someone else loses if someone picks our scooter. I think there's actually going to be a lot more demand than this initial cap is going to allow for. But the cap provides a way to understand how the system works before we increase the number and make sure that it's working well for everyone and not just the riders. Over time, I think you end up making a brand that people find compelling by focusing on things like safety, like reliability, like cleanliness of the vehicle. I like to use any kind of transportation system. Like I'm happier when it's those things. Mm-hmm. So that's what we focus on in the cities we already operate in, and that's what we'll focus on here.
And then, for the SFMTA, it doesn't particularly matter which company, as long as they're following and adhering to those guidelines that the SFMTA has set out.
Right. We set a pretty high bar through this permitting process, and we certainly expect that both Skip and Scoot are going to meet the terms they agreed to. Our focus is on one hand in welcoming this kind of innovation and trying to find ways to make it work, but on a day-to-day basis, we're looking out for the safety of San Franciscans, and especially on the sidewalk. I'm really glad to hear what Sanjay said about the sidewalk not being the place for 15, 20-mile-an-hour scooters zipping along, but rather, let's make the streets safe. Let's make the streets so safe that people feel safe riding scooters there.
Mm-hmm. And I guess how do you envision just over time? Just with this electric scooter program, like, in terms of usage, like what will like a successful pilot program look like?
Yeah, so the kind of overarching principles we've been talking about are safety, accountability, and equity. We certainly want to get through this year with safe operations. So clearly, we don't want those kinds of high-profile crashes you talked about. I think that was a car versus a scooter in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. So that's the baseline. We want a safe operation. And then we also want to see that one of the reasons why Skip and Scoot were successful in this process is that they talked about making sure that the scooters are not just downtown, but they're out in neighborhoods. We talk about these neighborhoods we call communities of concern, low-income communities, communities of color. The two successful scooter applicants have committed to put 20% of their scooters in those neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And so we'll be getting a lot of data. So we're really excited about getting that data, and we'll be looking to see whether we're creating a mode that works for everyone, not just for a few people downtown.
Nice. And so I know that initially the SFMTA was hoping to have a decision made. I believe it was like by July, but then it got pushed to August, end of August. What was kind of happening in the meantime there? Like why did the process kind of get extended?
Well, the first thing is we were pleasantly surprised that there were 12 different companies that applied for scooters. We honestly didn't expect anything like that. So great to see that level of interest. So 12 applications, over 1,000 pages of material that we needed to review, and we had to take the time to do it right. There was a lot of attention on this, as you said. You're in the introduction. You said this was an issue that just had the eyes of lots of people in San Francisco, and they were really counting on us to look out for the safety and accountability concerns that they saw. So we had to take the time to do it right. I know some folks were probably disappointed that we didn't do it sooner, but I think it was well worth the effort. I think we have the right people in the program.
And when you see the decisions of other cities, like which cities they decide to go with, which companies they decide to go with in terms of granting permits. So in Santa Monica, they ended up going with Lime and Bird. In San Francisco, very different story, Skip and Scoot. Does that make you wonder, did we pick the right companies? Like, what does Santa Monica think what are we missing that maybe they know? And
I wonder if they're wondering if they picked the wrong. No, Santa Monica was in a different position. They've issued permits that cover a wider range of shared mobility, including, I think, some dockless bike share as well. We've got programs in place for those modes, and we're pretty. We've been very happy with the performance of Jump, for instance, in their dockless bike share system. So we were really focused specifically on the scooter modes. That was one way in which we're different from Santa Monica. And the other thing is that our geography is different. We're a much denser city. Frankly, I think the market for scooter rides is much better in San Francisco. So we wanted the best, the applicants who brought the best scooter mode to San Francisco.
And Sanjay, I'm wondering why you went from personally owned electric vehicles like boosted boards to shared electric vehicles, and what value you saw in making that shift.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised when we started working on boosted boards and we saw so many people who had never touched a skateboard before say, this is one of the most important things that I own. And we dug into that and we found that the idea of a light electric vehicle that's bike lane compatible, that's relatively easy to kind of learn how to use. There's not a lot of licensing and regulation around it. You don't have parking tickets and DMV fees and things like that. It really complemented not just these need for short trips, but also it allowed them to access things like public transit much more easily. And so in the same way that the car industry or the car lane is served by different private ownership models and shared rides and things like that, I saw the same opportunity in the bike lane with these small vehicles. And so I've been thinking about how to bring kind of the magic that people talk about who own these products, and Josh Constein at TechCrunch is one of those who says like this is an incredible thing, how to bring that magic to more people. And so the shared system, I think, is in some ways much more accessible. You're not paying $500 or $1,000 for this vehicle yourself. You're not worried about it getting stolen, which can be a huge blow if you're counting on this thing for your daily commute. You're not worried about the maintenance of the vehicle. It's taken care of by someone else. And then it relieves you of that need to worry about what happens to it when it's done. You just leave it at the BART station, you get on BART, and you go. So I think there's opportunity for both, and I think they're both going to grow.
I mean, I guess I'm wondering if you worry that people will be riding around on these Skip scooters, have a really great time, and then think, oh, well, I'll just buy my own, and I'll stop using Skip. Like, is that a concern for you? That's
great. I mean, I think it's really important that people are getting out of cars and are using these vehicles, whether they're privately owned or shared. Like, I'm a believer in both modes. I think they're both going to improve, and I think infrastructure improvements that happen as a result of these shared pilot programs benefit private ownership. That's the biggest thing we heard from people who bought these vehicles. They said, oh man, I love this thing, but I just moved somewhere that doesn't have great bike lanes, and now I don't feel safe riding it. And so I'm not worried about people moving. I actually think it's going to be better for some people to own these vehicles and better for some people to share them, and both will be successful.
So over in DC, where you have a permit and have been operating for a few months now?
About 6 months.
About 6 months. What's usage like there? And specifically, I'm wondering, how many return riders do you have? Like, how often does the average rider get on a Skip scooter, like per month, let's say?
Yeah, so there's kind of two categories of riders. There's people who are visiting town. So Washington, D.C. has a lot of tourists, a lot of visitors, and then you have the people who are there on a regular basis. And then for those, you have commuter users, you've got people running errands, you've got people around campuses like Georgetown and GW who might be using it for different kinds of trips. So we don't have good segmentation between those, but generally we see a few trips a week from the people who are actively using it. We see very strong retention, and if you were to look at kind of the standard retention curves, you actually see people use it and then increase their usage over time as it becomes more of a habit. And you see generally very positive reviews. If you look at the App Store for our service and others, you'll see people say this is now part of how I get around. So overall retention's been really strong, and I think it's here to stay. I don't think it's a fad.
Yeah, and I guess just speaking of usage among like tourists versus residents, Tom, I mean in San Francisco, and I mean you've overseen the bike share program. Are you? I guess first, what have you seen with the bike share program? Is it more? Can you tell if it's more like tourists versus residents, or like who's really riding around on the bikes?
Sure. We have two bike share services in San Francisco. The Ford Go bikes, which are the larger dock system, and then we also have 250 dockless jump bikes. I think at broad strokes, we know that the majority of folks using the bike share system are either residents or employees, so not necessarily tourists. We know that a large number of them are buying the very affordable $150 annual membership, and then a subset of them are actually buying the the $5 annual membership for qualifying low-income riders. So it's definitely a mode that's probably more that's being taken up maybe more by San Franciscans than by tourists. There are bike rental companies. And there's other folks who serve the very specific tourist niche pretty well, but the loyalty and the number of rides per user among the annual and monthly riders has been going up. So to the point of making it a habit. It's the habit of riding a bike, riding a scooter. That's a great habit from the system's point of view. Great habit for people to get into.
And you mentioned that you have this view of like Vision Zero. When do you think that, if all goes according to plan, when will that happen, do you think?
So what we said in 2014, we said we're no longer accepting traffic fatalities in San Francisco. We've for years used words like accident, and we don't say accident anymore. We say crash, or we say fatality. We say things are everything's preventable. And so we're trying to do our part by redesigning the streets and re-engineering the streets in San Francisco to lower traffic speeds and to make shared mobility, especially small shared mobility, work better. Our goal is to get there by 2024. It's a long way to go. We lost 34 people in 2013, the year before we adopted Vision Zero. That number was down to 20 last year. I in no way want to take a victory lap for that kind of decline. The only acceptable number is 0. That's the point of Vision Zero. But our goal is to get there by 2024.
Okay. And it sounds like you see scooters as playing a big role in that, or is it scooters in combination with bikes, with public transportation, with Caltrain, Muni, BART?
Yeah, I think the challenge we're facing now when we talk about Vision Zero, or even making transit work better on our streets, is that this is happening at a time when the number of vehicles on the street is increasing. So even as on a percentage basis, more and more people are choosing sustainable ways to get around. The city's growing so fast that the number of cars is increasing. And the only way we're going to get to 0 is to pretty significantly reduce the number of cars on the street. And likewise, the only way we're going to get the performance we need out of our transit system, which is the way to support the growing city, is to reduce the number of cars in the street. So reducing vehicle traffic, scooters, bikes play a huge part in that, is part of that reduction.
And Sanjay, so we've seen some scooter companies raise hundreds of millions of dollars at multi-billion-dollar valuations. Is all that money necessary to have a successful scooter business?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think your ability to serve any one particular city does not depend on having that much cash, but your ability to scale to 50 cities or 100 cities or 200 cities definitely does, right? It's a complicated operation. You have to run, slightly different systems in all these different cities. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of scooters. And so I think that capital has been used by other companies to try to go into as many cities as possible, as quickly as possible. We've tried to focus on making our system work as well as possible in a few cities, and specifically investing in technology development that doesn't just benefit the riders, but that might benefit pedestrians or other people who are not the core users. That's actually been one of our core principles. So, our ability to do those things, to develop locking mechanisms or tip-over detection or other technologies in our scooters, those don't need that much capital. So we've been able to operate pretty efficiently and effectively in fewer cities, build those technology systems out, maintain conversations with different cities as they roll out permit processes like San Francisco. There's only a few cities that actually have a formal permit. A lot of them are still in process. And so our goal is to scale what we're doing much larger, but we don't need the capital today to do that.
Okay. I mean, how many cities do you envision being in within the next 12 months?
Hundreds.
Hundreds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And while, going through the proper processes, like permitting processes.
Yeah, so a lot of cities are watching what San Francisco does, what Washington, D.C. has done. Folks like Tom and his counterparts in other cities are all talking to each other to understand, trade notes and understand what's working well and what's not. And so you're going to see a lot more cities come online with permit processes in the next 6 to 12 months. And we're in conversations with all of them because they're interested in some of our technologies, they're interested in our approach. But there isn't necessarily a need to go into 50 cities tomorrow in order to make this an effective business.
Okay. And Tom, I mean, what other cities have you been kind of sharing notes with, would you say?
So, well, we certainly talked to Washington and
Okay.
got a read on their experience with Skip. I think one thing that we find with shared mobility is because so much innovation is happening here, and there's so much interest in shared mobility here, a lot of cities are looking to San Francisco to provide a little bit of leadership and a little bit of structure around what a good regulatory program would look like. And we saw that with shared stationless bikes. We've seen that with car share. We've seen that with private transit vehicles like Chariot. All these things that didn't really exist on the street even 6 or 7 years ago, which we've managed to bring successfully those choices to San Franciscans. So we know that a lot of other cities are watching this pilot, and we want this to succeed. I think cities where there's interest in a good regulated scooter system want it to succeed. And we're looking forward to sharing those lessons.
Cool. All right, well, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.